The wedding dress was still zipped in its garment bag when Adiz Bankole stepped out of the black car and looked up at the mansion that was now supposed to be her home. Rain had not fallen here the way it had in New York, but the air felt heavier somehow, thick with the kind of silence that money bought and secrets required. She did not reach for anyone's hand as she climbed the stone steps. She had learned in the last 6 weeks that reaching for help in this family was mistaken for weakness, and weakness, she suspected, got you sent back to whatever debt you came from. Behind her, 2 men carried her single suitcase up the steps like it was an afterthought, which it was. Everything about this marriage had been arranged in the space of 11 days. A contract dressed up as a wedding, her father's failing textile business swallowed whole by a debt to a man named Jun Hyun Cho, a debt that had transformed, overnight, into a bride price instead of a bankruptcy filing. Adiz had signed the papers herself. Nobody had forced her hand onto the pen. She told herself that mattered. Even now, even standing in front of a house that looked like it had swallowed better women than her and never once burped. The front doors opened before she reached them, and a woman in a dark blazer, hair pulled back severe and neat, looked her over with an expression that gave away nothing. "Mrs. Cho," the woman said, testing the name like it might not fit yet. "I am Yuna. I manage the house. Your husband is not here. He asked me to show you to your rooms." "Not here," Adiz repeated. "On my wedding night. He is rarely here," Yuna said, already turning to lead the way, heels clicking against marble that had probably cost more than Adiz's father's entire factory. "You will learn the schedule." The house was enormous in the way that made a person feel smaller, with every hallway, every closed door, every silent room with furniture that looked untouched by anyone who actually lived there. Adiz followed Yuna up a curved staircase and down a corridor lined with paintings that meant nothing to her, into a suite of rooms larger than the apartment she had grown up in with her parents and 2 younger siblings. A bed the size of a small boat. A closet already filled with clothes in her exact size that she had never chosen and never asked for. "He had these sent for you," Yuna said, following her gaze. "Sizes were taken from your measurements when the contract was drawn." "Of course they were," Adiz said quietly, running her fingers along a silk sleeve she would never have picked for herself. Everything here had been decided before she arrived. Her name on a paper. Her body's measurements taken without her in the room. She was starting to understand that this house did not ask questions. It only delivered conclusions. "There will be a household meeting tomorrow morning," Yuna said, already halfway to the door. "The staff, the senior men. It is customary for a new wife to be introduced." She paused, hand on the doorframe, and something almost like pity crossed her face before she smoothed it away. "I would not expect too warm a welcome if I were you." "Why not?" Yuna's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Because the last woman who stood where you are standing did not last 3 months. And the one before her did not last 1. This family does not believe wives survive here. They believe wives disappear, quietly, back to wherever they came from, once they understand what this house actually costs." The door closed with a soft, expensive click, and Adiz stood alone in a room built for a woman who was not supposed to exist for very long, and something in her chest, some old and stubborn thing that had gotten her through 4 years of nursing school on double shifts and no sleep, decided quietly and without permission that she was going to prove every single one of them wrong. The household meeting the next morning took place in a dining room with a table long enough to seat 20, though only 11 people occupied it when Adiz walked in. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. She recognized the shape of the silence immediately, the kind she had felt in hospital break rooms when she was the only black nurse on a floor full of people who assumed she did not belong there either, and she straightened her spine the same way she always had, chin level, eyes steady, refusing to shrink to fit anyone's expectation of how small she should be. At the head of the table sat a man she had married 2 days ago and had not yet spoken more than 11 words to. Jun Hyun Cho did not stand when she entered. He did not smile. He watched her cross the room with an attention so total and so still that it felt less like being looked at and more like being measured, weighed, filed away into some internal ledger he kept on everyone who walked into a room he controlled. His suit was black, cut so precisely it seemed to have no seams at all, and a thin silver watch sat on his wrist that she suspected cost more than her father's entire debt. His eyes were dark and unreadable, and when they finally settled on her face, something flickered there that she could not name, gone before she could examine it. "Sit," he said. "Not a request." She sat, 2 chairs down from him, close enough to feel the weight of his attention but far enough that the distance itself felt deliberate, a statement about where she currently stood in whatever hierarchy governed this table. An older man near the far end, silver-haired, his suit slightly less pristine than the others, cleared his throat with obvious disdain. "So this is the American wife," he said, not to Adiz, but to the room, as though she were an object under discussion rather than a woman present to hear it. "I give her a month, maybe less." A ripple of quiet laughter moved down the table. Adiz felt her pulse pick up, the old familiar heat of humiliation crawling up her neck, but she had spent 4 years in emergency rooms learning that the moment you let your face show what you felt, you lost whatever ground you were standing on. She kept her expression flat and turned her eyes toward the man who had spoken. "I'm sorry," she said, voice even, carrying easily across the table. "I didn't catch your name. I'd like to remember it, for when I prove you wrong." The laughter stopped. The silver-haired man's face went rigid with surprise, then anger, and beside her, so quietly she almost missed it, Adiz heard Jun Hyun Cho exhale something that was almost a laugh of his own. "Sang-woo," Jun said, not looking away from Adiz, "does not speak for this house." "Ido." The room went very still. Sang-woo's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further, and the meeting continued around Adiz in a language of glances and hierarchy she did not fully understand yet, but understood enough to know that something had just shifted. Some small crack opened in the wall the whole room had built against her before she ever walked through the door. That night, June found her in the East Wing kitchen, an hour past midnight, standing at the counter with a cup of tea she had made herself because she refused to ring a bell and ask someone else to boil water for her. He stopped in the doorway, still dressed from whatever business had kept him out until this hour, his tie loosened, a faint trace of cigarette smoke and something like sandalwood clinging to his jacket. "You should not be in the kitchen," he said. "There are people for that." "I know how to boil water, Mr. Cho," she said, not turning around. "I've been doing it myself since I was 8 years old."
"June," he said.
"If you are going to defy my staff's instructions, you may as well use my name while you do it." She turned then, studying him properly for the first time without a table full of witnesses. Up close, exhaustion sat behind his eyes in a way the boardroom composure had hidden. His hands, she noticed, were perfectly still, resting at his sides, but there was tension coiled through his shoulders that suggested stillness cost him something. "Why did you marry me?" she asked. "You could have just taken the factory. Bankrupted my father the normal way. Why the wedding?" Something shifted behind his eyes, calculation giving way, briefly, to something rawer. "Because a wife cannot testify against her husband," he said. "Because a wife inherits debts and protections both, and I needed a woman connected to nothing and no one in the city, someone with no family here to use as leverage against either of us."
He paused.
That was the arithmetic. "I will not pretend it was anything else." "At least you're honest," Adiz said. "I am not, usually," June said. "You should consider that a rare thing." She studied him a moment longer, then reached for a second cup from the cabinet, and without asking, without waiting for permission, poured tea into it and set it on the counter in front of him. He looked at the cup like it was a foreign object, something nobody had offered him without wanting something first and longer than he could remember. "I don't want anything from you tonight," she said, reading the question on his face before he asked it. "I just don't like drinking alone." He picked up the cup. He did not drink from it right away, only held it, the warmth seeping into his palm, watching her with an intensity that made her skin feel too warm despite the late hour. "Sang-woo believes you will run within the month," he said finally. "I don't run," Adiz said. "I fix things. It's what I do. I fixed IVs and broken bones and the worst nights of strangers' lives for 4 years before I ever set foot in this house. A cold dining room full of men who think laughing at me makes them powerful is not going to be the thing that breaks me." Something in June's face changed, not quite a smile, but close enough that she noticed it, filed it away the same careful way he had filed her when she walked into the room that morning. "No," he said quietly. "I do not think it will." Over the following weeks, Adiz learned the rhythms of the house the way she had once learned the rhythms of a hospital floor, methodically, without asking permission, absorbing information through observation rather than invitation. She learned which of the staff resented her and which merely feared what resenting her might cost them if June decided she mattered. She learned that Yuna, despite her cold introduction, watched her with something like grudging respect growing behind her eyes each time Adiz handled another small humiliation without flinching. She learned that the house ran on fear dressed up as order, and that fear, she was fairly certain, was not actually loyalty, no matter how many men at that long table mistook the two for each other. She began, without anyone officially asking her to, fixing things. A housekeeper named Grace had been quietly suffering migraines for months, afraid to ask for time off in a house where weakness invited scrutiny, and Adiz noticed the way the woman squinted against kitchen light and asked her about it directly, then spent an evening walking her through simple trigger management from her nursing training. No lecture, no pity, just information offered plainly. A young enforcer named Hyun Ki came back from an assignment with a shoulder he was favoring and trying to hide, terrified that any sign of injury would be read as weakness by the wrong person, and Adiz noticed that too, quietly telling him which stretches would keep the joint from locking up without making it a spectacle, without telling June, without making him feel exposed. Word moved through a house like this the way it moved through a hospital floor, quiet and constant, carried in glances and small kindnesses remembered. Within a month, staff who had avoided her eyes in the hallway had started nodding when she passed. Within 6 weeks, Yuna had started bringing her problems directly instead of working around her. But Sang-woo's resentment did not soften. If anything, it hardened, curdled into something that watched her from across every room with open calculation, a man who had staked his pride on her failure and refused to let evidence change his position. The first real danger arrived on a warm evening in early June, 6 weeks into the marriage, when Adiz was walking back from the East Garden where she had taken to reading in the evenings, one of the only places in the house that felt like it belonged to her rather than to the ghosts of the wives before her. A car she did not recognize idled at the edge of the property, engine running, and before she could process the wrongness of it, 2 men she had never seen stepped out from behind a hedge and closed the distance between them faster than she could run. She did not scream. She had learned, somewhere in 4 years of trauma bays, that screaming wasted breath she might need for something more useful. Instead, she threw the book in her hand hard into the face of the nearer man, buying herself half a second, and used that half second to reach for the small canister of pepper spray she had started carrying in her cardigan pocket the week Yuna warned her that a new bride in this world was never fully safe, not even inside the walls of the estate that supposedly protected her. The spray bought her another few seconds, the man staggering back with a curse, and Adiz ran, not toward the house directly but toward the security post near the garden gate, screaming now, finally, because screaming was the useful thing to do once running had started. 2 of June's men came fast, and gunfire cracked once through the warm evening air, and by the time June himself arrived at a dead sprint from the house, jacket abandoned somewhere behind him, the 2 intruders were already face down on the grass, restrained, and Adiz was standing upright, breathing hard, alive, having bought herself the seconds that mattered before anyone else arrived to save her. June's hands found her face the way a drowning man reaches for air, checking for injury with a desperation that cracked straight through the careful stillness he wore like armor every single day she had known him. "Are you hurt?" he said, voice rough in a way she had never heard from him. "Adiz, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she said, and meant it, adrenaline still hammering through her, but her voice steady. I threw a book at his face and maced the other one.
I'm fine.
Something close to disbelief crossed his face, and then, astonishingly, something close to a laugh, short and startled out of him. "You maced him." "I've been carrying it since Yuna told me I should," she said. Figured a nurse who spent 4 years watching people bleed out from stupid mistakes doesn't take chances with her own safety. June's thumb traced along her cheekbone, an unconscious gesture, gentle in a way that did not match the coiled violence still radiating off him as his men dealt with the intruders behind them. Sang-woo sent them, he said quietly, jaw tight. I am certain of it. He could not break you through humiliation, so he decided to try something more direct. Then deal with him, Adiz said, the way you deal with everything else in this house. Directly. I intend to, June said, and something in his voice promised a reckoning that made even the men restraining the intruders go quiet around them. That night, after the intruders had been dealt with in ways Adiz did not ask about and did not particularly want explained, June found her again in the same kitchen where they had shared tea weeks earlier, except this time, he did not stand in the doorway measuring her. He crossed the room and stood close, closer than he had ever allowed himself to stand, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. I did not expect to feel what I felt tonight, he admitted finally, voice low. Watching that car. Not knowing if you were safe inside it or lying somewhere on my own property. I have felt fear before, Adiz. I did not know I could feel it like that. Not since my sister. Adiz went still. Your sister. June's expression closed briefly, an old wound flickering behind careful eyes before he let it surface, deliberately, a choice rather than a slip. My older sister, Soo-jin. She ran logistics for our family's business before I inherited it. 15 years ago, a rival faction targeted her to send my father a message, believing a daughter was an acceptable price for territory. I was 22. I was the one who found her. His jaw tightened, the words coming slower now, each one costing him something visible. I built every wall in this house after that day. I told myself no one would ever again be close enough to me to become a weapon used against me. And then you walked up those front steps in a dress you did not choose, and I watched you refuse to become small in a room full of men who wanted you to disappear, and every wall I built started developing cracks I did not ask for and cannot seem to repair. I'm sorry about your sister, Adiz said quietly, and meant it, the old ache of losing patience she could not save rising sympathetically in her chest. I am not telling you for sympathy, June said. I am telling you because tonight, watching that car, I understood I have already failed to keep the wall intact.
You're already inside it.
I do not know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it tonight, Adiz said. But I'm not going anywhere, June. Not because of a contract, and not because I'm afraid of what happens if I try to leave. I'm staying because I decided somewhere around the second week of being laughed at by that table that I was going to make this house mine whether anyone here liked it or not. You're part of that now, whether either of us planned for it. Something in his face broke open, just slightly, just enough. He did not kiss her that night. But his hand found hers on the counter, and he did not let go for a long time, and the silence between them was not empty the way the house's silence had felt on her first night here. It was full of something neither of them had a name for yet, but both of them, finally, were willing to let exist. Sang-woo's second attempt came 3 weeks later, and this time, he did not bother hiding behind hired men outside the property. He moved from within, using his standing among the senior men to call an emergency meeting while June was away settling a territory dispute 2 hours outside the city, and by the time Adiz understood what was happening, she was standing again at the head of that long dining table, except this time surrounded by men Sang-woo had spent weeks quietly feeding them a story about a wife who was becoming too involved in household affairs that were not hers to touch, a wife whose growing influence threatened the order that kept this world functioning. She has turned half the staff against proper hierarchy, Sang-woo said to the assembled men, not looking at Adiz directly, performing his outrage for an audience rather than addressing her. She treats enforcers like patients, staff like equals. This is not how a wife behaves in this family. I move that she be removed from the estate before Cho returns, for the good of the organization, before her influence costs us more than embarrassment. Adiz felt the old heat rise in her chest, the familiar instinct to defend herself rearing up, but underneath it, something steadier had grown in the months since she first walked up those front steps, something that had been built one small kindness and one hard confrontation at a time, brick by brick, until it could hold weight. You want to remove me, she said, stepping fully into the room instead of standing at its edge, for treating your people like they matter. For noticing when your enforcer's shoulder was about to lock up permanently from an untreated injury he was too afraid to report. For sitting with your housekeeper through migraines nobody bothered asking about before I arrived. She let her gaze travel slowly around the table, meeting eyes that had laughed at her 3 months ago and now, mostly, could not quite hold her stare. You called this order. I call it neglect dressed up as tradition, and I think most of the people in this room who actually do the work around here know the difference, even if you don't. Grace stood near the doorway, having come in to refill water glasses, and to Adi's genuine surprise, she spoke, quiet but clear. She's right, Grace said. Nobody in this house cared if we survived it before she arrived. Now somebody does. A murmur moved through the room, not unanimous, but enough that Sang-woo's confident posture faltered visibly, enough that he understood, in real time, that the ground beneath his coup had shifted without his permission. This is not your house to command, Sang-woo said to Adi's, voice rising now, control slipping. You are a debt paid in a dress. Nothing more. Careful, said a voice from the doorway, low and lethal, and every head in the room turned as Jun Hyun-cho stepped inside 2 hours ahead of schedule, having driven back the moment a loyal soldier called to warn him what was happening in his absence. His eyes moved over the room once, cataloging every face, every posture, filing away exactly who had stood with Sang-woo and who had not, before settling on Adi's with an intensity that silenced the room completely. She is my wife, Jun said, crossing to stand beside her, close enough that the gesture itself was a statement no one at that table could misread. And in the months since she arrived, she has done more to secure genuine loyalty in this house than any of you have managed in years of demanding it through fear. Sang-woo, you called an emergency meeting behind my back to remove her from my house while I was 2 hours away handling business you should have been handling with me. That is not concern for order. That is an attempt to seize control while my back was turned, and we both know it. Sang-woo's face drained of color. Jun, I only meant. You meant to test how far you could push while I trusted you enough to leave the house in your care, Jun said, voice quiet now, quieter than before, the particular quiet that Adi's had learned by now was more dangerous than any shout. You sent men after her in June. I know it was you. I chose, for the sake of the family's stability, to handle that quietly. I will not make that same choice twice. The room went utterly silent. Sang-woo's eyes darted toward the door, toward the men who had, moments earlier, seemed to stand with him, and found no support there now, only the careful, unreadable stillness of men recalculating loyalty in real time. You have until morning, Jun said, to be gone from this territory. Not this house. This territory. If I see you again after tonight, the mercy I am currently extending will not be extended twice. Sang-woo left the room without another word, and the men around the table, one by one, inclined their heads toward Jun and, more surprising to Adi's, toward her, a gesture of respect that had not existed in that room 3 months ago, that she had built one small refusal to shrink at a time. When the room finally emptied, Jun turned to her, and the mask he wore for every other person in his life fell away completely, leaving only the man underneath, the one who had found his sister on the worst day of his life and built a fortress around himself so no one could ever cost him that much again. You handled that before I ever walked through the door, he said. You did not need me to save you. No, Adiz agreed. But I'm glad you came anyway. I will always come, Jun said, and the words landed with a weight that neither of them tried to soften. I told myself I married you for arithmetic, for protection, for leverage, for the shape of a contract that solved a debt. That was true for exactly as long as it took you to walk into a dining room full of men who wanted you gone and refused to leave. I do not know the exact day it stopped being arithmetic. I only know that somewhere between the tea you poured me without being asked and the book you threw at a stranger's face to buy yourself 3 seconds, it became something I am no longer willing to lose. Adiz studied his face, searching for the calculation she had learned to watch for in every room in this house, and found, for the first time since she arrived, none at all. Only a man who had spent 15 years refusing to let anyone close enough to matter, finally admitting that the wall had failed. "I didn't marry you for arithmetic either," she said quietly. "I signed those papers because I didn't see another way to save my father, and I told myself that was the whole truth of it. But somewhere in the last few months, this stopped being a debt I was paying off and became a life I actually chose. I chose this house. I chose these people. I choose you, June, not because a contract says I have to, but because I decided to build something here instead of just surviving it." He reached for her then, slowly, the way he had after the attack in the garden, giving her the choice to step back if she wanted it, and when she did not step back, his hand cradled her face with a gentleness that the boardroom composure had never once suggested he was capable of. "By the time Sang-woo called that meeting today," he said, "half the house had already chosen you over him. That was not luck, Adiz. That was 3 months of you refusing to disappear the way every woman before you disappeared. You did not run this house because I gave it to you. You ran it because you earned it, one refusal at a time." Summer settled fully over the estate in the weeks that followed, and the mansion that had felt like a mausoleum on Adiz's first night began, slowly and without ceremony, to feel like something closer to a home. Grace no longer hid her migraines. Hyun Ki's shoulder healed properly, without complication, because he had finally trusted someone enough to say something before the injury became permanent. Yuna stopped testing her and started simply working alongside her, the two of them running the household's daily rhythms with an ease that would have seemed impossible in April. And in the quiet hours after the house went still, June found her more often than not in that same East Wing kitchen, no longer measuring her from the doorway but crossing the room without hesitation, without calculation, choosing her the same deliberate way she had chosen, months earlier, to stay. "They said you would not last a month," he said one evening, watching her pour 2 cups of tea without being asked, the way she always did now, the way that had become its own quiet ritual between them. "I heard," Adiz said, sliding his cup across the counter toward him. "I think I'm going to enjoy proving them wrong for a long time." "You already have," June said, and this time, when he smiled, it reached all the way to his eyes, unguarded and entirely hers, a small quiet miracle in a house that had never once, before her, believed a wife could survive it, let alone come to run it. If Adiz's story pulled you in the way it pulled her into a house that never wanted her to stay, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more dark romance stories every single week. Drop a comment below and tell us what part of Adiz's story hit you hardest, and if you want more forbidden love stories where danger and devotion collide, hit that notification bell so you never miss the next release. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next story.